My mic was muted. Hello. Try this again. Hi, everybody, and hello to our audience. Thank you guys so much for watching Black Conservative Female at a special time. I am going to ask you right away to tell us where you are viewing from, most importantly. So glad that you're here. Go ahead, hit that share button. Everyone is going to want to see this show. Do a watch party. You know what to do out there. And as soon as this show is over, I am going to ask you to follow our special guest because you'll just get some of the best insights that I've gotten during this political season. First, I want to do is welcome Stephanie Trussell. Thank you so much for being here with me, Stephanie. Uh-oh, let me make sure you are muted. I apologize.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity, a special time. So I'm looking forward to this.
We are totally looking forward to this. So several months ago, I happened on Instagram across a fantastic voice during this political season. He's been somebody that has truly helped to keep me sane. And if you are on Telegram, you're going to want to follow him. If you're on Instagram, you're going to want to follow him. And I want to welcome to the show, Joaquin Flores. Thank you so much for being here, Joaquin.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be with you.
It is truly an honor. So we are at a special time because Joaquin is in Eastern Europe as we speak. And so this works out for him a little better than 2 a.m. And so
right.
We really appreciate you working this out for us, as well as, being somewhat of a rebel. You are banned on Facebook, but look at here you are.
Right.
Yeah,
We found a way.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a long history as a revolutionary, so it's all good. It's all good. In fact, I'd love for you to share with us a bit about your background and your interest in that got you into geopolitics.
Right. Well, I guess just the brief version, right? The family friendly version. As a youth, I was a radical from urban Los Angeles and experienced a lot of the problems of city life and saw the vast inequalities of wealth, and I saw a lot of the social problems connected to it, and I wanted to see lasting social change. And the more that I studied and the more that I learned, the road took twists and turns, and I saw how much the sphere or the arena of international affairs and international trade really affected people, especially in urban Los Angeles with outsourcing, our jobs going overseas, and how that really destroyed once thriving communities. And besides breaking my heart, it also hardened my resolve to approach things both culturally, but also geopolitically. So overcoming what sometimes is called a culture of poverty, but also which is the things that we can do in our daily lives, but also looking at how we can change and make lasting change in politics to hold politicians accountable for unbalanced trade deals and how we can bring jobs back home. And so that's really been one focus. And also the forever wars. I think no one can talk about geopolitics without talking about these forever wars. Certainly, when we're attacked, we have to defend ourselves, but there was some really questionable things that happened in the last 20 years. So I think a lot of people are on the same page with that. We can speak in code. We don't have to say what we mean, but we all know. And so I'm just honored to be with you today. And yeah, that's basically where I come from. And so in that journey, it was transformative. As I began to try to change the world, I myself changed in some way.
Well, I have to ask, were you a product of the LA public schools? Did you go on to college? When
Yes,
did you
right.
first get, okay.
Yeah, I come out of LA Unified School District. And then from there through the local, LA Community College District, LACCD, and then through the California State University system. And then from there, I did labor and community organizing, and working with, everything from AFSCME to ACORN to SEIU and all the usual suspects. So I know very well how these games work. And I know very well, I was right there in 2006, 2007, 2008, playing games with the Margaret Lee Thomas seat for the LA County Board of Supervisors, the 47th and 49th Assembly District races. I did ground campaign, get out the vote. I saw exactly what happens when you go into a polling station and you start messing around with things. Okay. So when I saw these things happen in this last, we won't use words, but with the last big event that happened, I saw very clearly and I knew exactly what the game plan was.
Wow.
Wow. So you were, I'm sorry. So I'm assuming you were on the other side. When you said community organizer, it made me think of Obama. He was a community organizer.
That's right.
So you those organizations that you named, they were not right of center. So you've been to the dark side.
That's,
okay.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
To the dark side. I have to ask you, just because of your wide range of knowledge, like I swear I was wondering, like, did he have a TV growing up? It just seems like you've only read. Since you could read, all you've done is read. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm
curious.
no cable in our home. It was a time when it was HBO came out, Cinemax, HBO, all that was coming out, MTV. None of that in the house, but it's but the more I kind of picked my parents' brains about this, and they're like, you know what, you just had your own interests also. And they say with kids and infants that you can, they just either they're interested in the world or they're not. I mean, parental situation is important, reinforcement. The materials have to be there, and they were. My mom was into all kinds of things. There was like feminist literature, there was Carl Jung, there was all kinds of stuff related to the Chicano and Chicana movement, which was big in the 60s and 70s in urban Los Angeles. And, that stuff, it gets the mind working, and, not all the information is correct, but you begin to, deal with abstract ideas, and then you can begin to deconstruct or challenge them. So yeah, it was a good environment, I think, with that.
Well, I know a lot of the people watching are familiar with your work. If you have questions for Joaquin, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'll be featuring those today. I know my big interest in bringing you on the show today. I've been following you since you've had the Telegram, and you gave us a little formula by which you kind of would forecast whether you believed in. So I'll just be honest, we're a little bit under the radar here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and talk like we normally do. So that Trump would be in office, and so you have this kind of complex mathematical scientific formula that you use. And so I'm interested in you, like, just breaking that down, and how I know before the inauguration, we were kind of, had it at about 85%. Now we're at about 15%. But I love how you explained the sort of significance of 15% with that revolver game or whatever. But if you could share about that and how your feelings are with that.
Yeah, well, basically, sort of following up on my journey and how that gets to that question right there, is that I really wanted to learn everything possible about revolutions. And so I studied, almost every revolution in history possible. And that involves also counter revolutions and coups. And that's actually part of community organizing, the same field book. So when I was in labor and community organizing with SEIU, a lot of the same tactics and methods are used. And so I saw those happening in this past election, which is called the Color Revolution. And, some of the big names in that are people like Gene Sharp and people like this, the Albert Einstein Institute, Canvas, and Otpor, and groups like that. And this was the subject of my study. So now when looking at the schematics, right, looking at how that breaks down, is that governments and political parties need to know what they need an assessment. And it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but there has to be some sort of rubric, some sort of matrix that you can say, okay, well, according to this, metric, this is what the chances are of this, all things being, all other factors being equal, right? So it doesn't mean that that's what the chances actually are. So that's the first thing to understand about statistics, is that it does, it's a map, not the reality, right? The map is not the terrain. But, just in short, you take big factors like, do the people support the government in power? Does the military support the government in power? In this case, we're talking about the president, right, at the time. And does the media support? And so you have like basically 1,000 points, let's say 1,000 points, and then you might give 300 for this and 50 for that, all these other little cultural factors. You can take as many different possible contingent factors from every different coup and revolution situation in history that you can try to quantify and qualify. So you take variables and you qualify them as variables, and then you try to assign a numerical value, like to quantify those. So you can look at the Mexican Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, American Revolution, French Revolution, and then a whole bunch of coups and counter revolutions, the Haitian Revolution. You can go on and on and on. And you look at what are the different classes in society, the different interest group, and who's supporting who. So, and then another big factor is the person that's in power has an advantage because they can exercise, hypothetically, they can exercise the power of the state. They can exercise the gendarmerie, the state apparatus, the military, and what have you. Maybe the courts are with them, maybe not. But being in power is a tremendous advantage to not being in power. So all that together, I had an 85% chance before. This is after November 3rd. This is after November 3rd. I had 85%. But then, we saw that big event happen. We're under the radar screen, I hope. So we saw that big event happen on the 20th. And then I had said, if that is a swearing in, then that just changes, a number of those major contingent factors. Who's in power and who does the military appear to support? So what you have, and I just take the most conservative estimates possible. I don't look at, chatter. I don't look at what opinions. I just look at what appears to be. That's why it can be so inaccurate.
I just want to stop you there because see, a lot of people looked at the 20th and went to 0%. Actually, many people kind of went to negative 45. Anyone who gave it a chance, you know what I mean? It was like, But again, like that's why I say that pessimism is not realism. And people mistake that all the time. Listen, pessimism and optimism, that's like 50-50. So you at least have to say that you're not more realistic by being pessimistic, right? You're just making a negative assessment based on what's going on inside of you. But that is not more realistic, right? What I love about what you do is breaking it down in a scientific type way, that is actual realism on a certain level. So I want you to continue, but I just wanted to sort of interject that because I know where people are at in their heads.
Right. No, it's that's a very fair point, and where that comes from in psychology is very interesting. But people make a lot of mistakes through pessimism. People make a lot of mistakes through pessimism, but people who succeed and people who win take the chance. He who dares wins. And just something that I think has helped people in business and life and all sorts of things is to understand that if you have a 10% chance of doing something and, of succeeding at something, and then you do that thing, that 10%, you don't compare that to the other 90%. You compare that to the 0% chance of success of not doing anything.
Yes.
And 10% is infinitely more than 0. It's not 10 times more, 20 times more. 10% is infinitely more. That's mathematical. Infinitely more than 0%. So it's always better to try and to try again and to fail than never to try. You have an infinitely better chance than not doing anything at all. Inaction and inertia is the killer of everything in life. And DJT knows this. All strategic planners know this. And so that's why we can look in the history of counter coups or counter revolutions, or however you want to term this or frame this, that there's been any number of cases in which a pretender or a person engaged in a coup has even been sworn in, and that has not been the end of the story. A counter against that coup had later been successful after someone was sworn in, Why? Well, there are always plans, and when you see that bus coming, when you see that train coming, down the road, you're making plans around it. So the idea that there was not a plan at all, I'm not talking about the chatter and what different, conspiracy theories. This is not my interest at all. I'm saying that factually, all governments and political parties in power, or whoever you want to say, make contingency plans when crisis events are arising relating to a struggle for contest of power, especially when the majority of the population already supports them. That's a huge factor. So looking at all of that, we know that there are contingencies. It's not like a plan. It's like, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K plan, right? It's like contingency plans, right? So it's not a plan, but it's many plans. So, and
take us back to the 15% as well, for sure. Like, how do you get there?
Now, 15% is low, but that's when you want something to happen. But when you don't want something to happen, that 15% is really, really high. So we talk about, Russian roulette, right? So that's 1 in 6. That's about 15%. You would not sit down and play that game. You would not put one bullet in the chamber of 6 and then spin it, and you wouldn't point that gun to your head and pull the trigger, because 15% chance is a really high chance when you think about it like that. So that's one way to. I think that's what the reference was earlier, right? That you made.
Definitely, I just couldn't think of the name. I haven't seen enough espionage movies to remember the name of it. But So you're basically saying, based, like, one of the hugest factors, I think one of your most heavily weighted factor is the people's support, right? In terms of the ability to make this happen. Certainly his desire to have it happen, knowing that we don't want the fake, we want the real. What are some other factors that you say would contribute?
Yes. So because of the rise of new media, the role of the media is increasingly difficult to gauge. But historically, you look at the role of legacy media, and the role of legacy media is the one that you can quantify the most easily, because you can say there's 5 networks, there's 8 networks, whatever, and they have this attitude. But the influence of legacy media over the population is really hard to quantify now in my models. And I'm hoping in the next to be able to improve that model, because you always have, because every new scenario is new data, right? And when you're looking at the history of all revolutions for the last 200 years, larger media is overall more predominant, especially in the 20th century. So it's really hard to quantify the role of alternative media or just, majoritarian populist media that's not on the legacy networks, but might be speaking to a majority or at least a large segment of voters. But in calling this at 15%, I have media against DJT.
Right.
But because I can't plug in, but that's a conservative number, therefore, because I can't actually say, it could be, if there was, let's say, about a third of the points possible relate to the role of media. So if I have that completely wrong, and in fact, what I don't have a good metric, so that's why I couldn't plug it in, right? But if hypothetically people were not getting most of their attitudes shaped from legacy media, then that number might go up to 25%. I don't have a way, but I don't like to give the most optimistic number possible. I like to give the most realistic possible number, which is often better than pessimistic, but lower than optimistic, right?
Definitely. Stephanie, how is this information hitting you?
You had shared his page with me before, because I never think of Instagram as a place to go for political things, because that's where people post pictures of their dogs or what they had for dinner. And so if you're not on Facebook, it's a great way to reach people. So when I'm listening to your vocabulary, and people that follow you are quite familiar, but I'm sure we've got people that that are hearing you for the first time. When you hear a word like revolution, of course we know what the revolution meant back 200 or whatever years ago, and it was certainly great results in our opinion. But I think are people, some of the language that you use, are people kind of put off? I'm inspired by the 15%. When you put it like that, I'm thinking anything's possible. Now I'm feeling very motivated, but I'm sure you've got a lot of supporters. But do you get that kind of feedback, like how dare you use words like coup or revolution, and get people all worked up like that's never going to happen? Or what kind of feedback do you get with that? And do you have a glossary? Because I want to be able to use words like instead of saying the Super Bowl, you have to say the big game. And so now you're saying the big day, because I don't want to get flagged. I'm trying to stay on Facebook, so I love how you're using the words around to keep from getting flagged. But go ahead.
Yeah, we have to speak in code, right?
On Instagram, you really do.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's the color revolution is what you saw, where the very big vested interest in big tech and the big financial backers, Soros and Zuckerberg and people like this, that's when they got when they started to directly be engaged in financing a network called Democracy Action, which in turn was working with Act Blue and was financing a lot of the activities of the protest movement, in particular, the Antifa groups that were pretending to be BLM groups. So there was a lot of mixing of these two things, where you would see what media would call BLM, but then you would see a sea of white faces engaged in a lot of the vandalism. And these were called BLM, but it actually was Antifa. So, but their legal fees and the organizing costs and flying them, like they had some pretty violent repeat offenders that were being flown around the country, catch and release, and then flown around, catch and release, because the local DAs were working with law enforcement and with this conglomeration, this fix of very powerful, wealthy, vested interests to stage a ultimately fake protest movement to delegitimize the executive branch. So that's what we mean by color revolution. So, it makes sense that we could say a counter color revolution is what DJT would have been planning around. And, whatever the plans still are remain to be seen. But certainly there's good arguments to make for having number 46 come in and be sworn in and assume a lot of the responsibilities and problems that it looks like they had already decided to go full steam ahead on, with a lot of the other things that we're aware of relating to the economy, shutdown, lockdown.
Yeah, right.
So it's sort of it's like chess. Sometimes you have to back off and let the pieces move in, and before you can get them into a bad position. So I don't know that that's what's happening, but it's conceivable. It's conceivable. But on the glossary point, it's a very fair question. I think people understand. I think that using these terms objectively and matter-of-factly, people respect the forthrightness, because you're saying, look, this was an attempt to subvert the, at least critics say that critics would say that there was an attempt to subvert the outcome that DJT otherwise had, and that therefore the attempts to stop that would be both morally, ethically, and perhaps legally legitimate. So, but people don't seem to mind that these terms are, now social media has a bigger problem with using these words than people do. But definitely the feedback has been good. And I think, in answer to your question, that the bigger problems come up in censorship, but the public seems to understand very well when you say, hey, George Soros staging these fake protests. People, especially who follow world affairs, a lot of my audience are sort of international affairs train watchers. So they say, oh, we saw this in Ukraine, or we saw this in Hungary, or we saw this in Germany. And, Soros is very active in Europe with these same antics. So it's not like a new thing they plan to do for the first time. This is happening a lot in the world in the past 25 years, very, very heavily.
And that's the thing that's so powerful. Like we don't have a lot of that history, and Americans don't tend to be as interested in international politics, quite frankly. I don't know how much people around the world are interested in international politics as much as they are in their own, and following America a little bit, if they sort of, they tend to understand the impact. We have a couple of questions from the audience, but I have another personal question that I want to bring in. And I'm just curious your opinion. So like I said, like following you has been such a blessing to me because it's universally accessible information. However, like my beliefs are based on, and I know that, you are Christian, you're Orthodox. We're all Christians on this show, and they're just used to us going to church on this show. So just so you know, but, my beliefs in Trump being in office are really based, I would say religiously, spiritually, they are based on prophecy. They're based on very credible, accurate prophets, modern prophets, as well as the alignment with the prophetic in the Bible. So, I don't bring this up in the groups that you're in and things like that because like it affects everyone, but it's not necessarily universal. My calling, though, is to hold people accountable, those that say they believe the Bible. I hold people accountable to believe the Bible. Like we just say we believe the Bible, we don't actually read it, and we think that maybe God did things back then that he doesn't do now, which, what I love is that you purport using your logic along with as you're reading things, and that doesn't make any sense. Like if he was going to stop doing certain things, like for example, he said he would never flood the earth again. Okay, so he'll tell you when he's never going to do something again, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, you can assume that if he spoke to people then, he speaks to people now. If there were prophets then, there are prophets now. And we can assess things based on the things that are in the Bible. So I just was wondering, like, if you've followed any of that. I mean, I know it can't go into your work, but I was just curious your opinion on that.
Yeah. I would say that in terms of like how when people talk about the supernatural in the Bible, certainly the idea that the things that happened in biblical events are no longer relevant, or that the idea that miracles or frankly, crazy unimaginable things can't happen in the present is primarily a product of a particular ideological construct that grew out of the late Enlightenment period, and really the 17 and 1800s, and we got this whole paradigm called science versus religion. But in terms of early modernity and pre-modernity, from the Renaissance and the humanists all the way through until about the middle of the 18th to beginning of the 19th century, the idea that science and religion were at war with each other was completely fall on deaf ears. It was a completely non-existent concept. Science was developed to understand the mind of God, or to understand, it wasn't to understand why. Why is, because God wills it. But the people wanted to understand how, like what's the mechanical stuff going on? How does light work? How does gravity work? How do the continents move around on tectonics and things like that, right? So the idea that the idea, and quite admittedly, even science today, within its own, what they call its epistemic framework, its theory of knowledge, the epistemology of science, or the theory of knowledge of science, right? The philosophy of science, right? They don't claim to make any claim about God or creation at all. That's simply a question which from the outside is set aside, right? So that's how, I understand that things that we have now been intentionally blinded to see, I would say, the miraculous in everyday life. And we have been blinded and sort of trained, because you can be trained not to see things. It's like grooming. It's like almost like psychological abuse.
Yeah.
There are miracles happening all the time. The miracle of life, the miracle of birth. I mean, when you really spend time even in nature and look at, vegetables and trees and stuff, and you actually understand the complexity of these things, even on the, you know, the microcellular level, it's amazing. It baffles all, you know, formal reasoning that this could have happened, you know, randomly or out of completely naturalistic processes undirected by a creator. So, you know, that's why when it's sort of, the paradigm that we're living in is so toxic and so dangerous because it's designed specifically to put the, like a horse, you know, with blinders on. It's very much a sign of the times that we are being led this way. But I've noticed more and more people waking up, and especially with the, can I say it, the LOCKDOWN.
Yeah,
when
right.
when people were not allowed to even go outside, they experienced transformative, you know, events in their life. People witnessed little minor miracles. They reevaluated the things that were important to them. Family became more important. They became, I would say even that the power of miracles is growing in the world as we speak. So I have personally observed this in the past 10 years, that there's been some shift in consciousness among people, and the idea that religious thinking is backwards thinking is a 20th century idea. And the things I'm seeing in the 21st century looking forward is the realignment of religious thinking with scientific thinking.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And before, Stephanie, in case you have any questions, I want to take yours before we go to the ones in the comments. But if you have not shared the broadcast, guys, go ahead and please share. As you can see, this is someone whose voice is like helpful. You know what I mean? It's not just needs to be heard. It's like helpful out there. And I would say part of it as well is that, you know, we were talking about sort of the specific glossary, but just also like speaking to Americans intelligently is like really good for us. You know what I mean? Like it's like everything has been so dumbed down, and it's like trying to be accessible, right? Like we want to make, I don't know if you heard the story about the Gorilla Glue girl, but like we want to make people like her a victim as opposed to someone who can't read, that you don't put Gorilla Glue in your hair. You know,
and this woman is 40 years old. She's 40.
Jesus in heaven.
Not some, you know, that's even more revealing. Yeah. Yeah,
I saw somebody say, you know, she's stupid, but her hair is laid. I said, well, that's what I say about Kamala Harris. I mean, it's going around, you know what I mean? Beautiful hair, but dumb as a box of rocks. So it's just, it's powerful when someone speaks to us intelligently, because one thing I liked about Andrew Yang was his little slogan, make America think harder. And we can do that. Like we can speak to each other intelligently. People respond well to big vocabulary, and it's like, it's just good for us. So anyway, any questions before we go to the comments, Stephanie? Or did you freeze? Or am I frozen?
I see you.
You're okay. Good. Okay, she must have frozen. Okay, so we'll go on ahead to our questions. Jess Olivito had a couple of good ones here. Her first one was, how do we make a difference locally in divided communities regarding election integrity? So, you know, kind of a where do we go from here in case the 85% is what we end up with, I suppose, because I do believe election integrity, it would be a big boon for Trump to be in office. That would certainly help. But for now, what do we do?
Yeah, it's from Jess. That's actually the number one question, I think, is actually moving forward, like, because, you know, waiting for events to occur and seeing what happens is interesting, but we have to move forward and you know, build upon the gains of this movement. But this is a unique opportunity because election integrity affects all Americans. And this is something which many Democrats are very aware of. They were not happy with Pete Buttigieg. They were not happy with Biden. They were not happy with what happened to Sanders, actually. And so, you know, yeah, I believe in there being different parties, and I believe in a wide debate, and I believe that people can disagree greatly on political philosophies, but that people have a right to vote, and that the person that wins the election wins the election. That's so important no matter what. And I know that lots of Democrats the real grassroots Democrats who actually agreed with DJT on questions like China and trade and jobs. Those are the very same people who were robbed during the primaries, according to, you know, critics of the primary system. So that is actually a great place to begin. And what you do is you make a litmus test for people running for, we can see how important it was for to run people for the state legislatures, not just representatives from your state to Washington, but in the state legislatures, because they decide whether you're going to have, you know, more like electronic voting or you're going to have a paper trail and what the audit system is. So you need to control those legislatures, and you can probably get them to sign an agreement, and you can probably put money behind it. Like, if you're not willing to sign this, that you do X, Y, and Z, or you are liable for, you know, how you're going to lose your house, right? Then you do it like that. I mean, you have to put people who want to run for office and they're making promises and they're not willing to put their own property behind the things that they're going to stand for. Well, what are the real intentions?
Wow, that's powerful. Has that been done before? I mean, how does one do that? Like,
you just do it like a contract. You just do it like a contract. You see, the thing is that the United States is different from most other countries because our primaries are open, and you can register as whatever party you want, and you can run as a candidate from that party. See, in other countries, even though they have more parties, it actually, all those parties function the way that Hillary Clinton tried to run the DNC. That the executive, you know, the CEO of the party chooses who's going to be the main representative in the election for that party. Okay, they don't have primary process where it's open. Does that make sense? However, in these other parliamentary systems, there's no limit to the number of parties. But in the United States, it's basically two parties, but anyone can run. So I would recommend that people run as Democrats, people run as Republicans, and we hold them accountable, because what we don't have is accountability in the party system. In the European and parliamentary Latin American models, and also a lot of models that you see in Africa and South Asia with parliamentary systems, they have more accountability, even though they're a little bit more top down, right? So we need to introduce that level of accountability so that when they say, I'm going to strike down this, let's say, electronic voting system, right? We're going to move against that. Well, then you get them elected, and how do you hold them accountable? You have to hold them personally accountable. You have to hold them financially accountable. They have to sign a contract that's, you know, enforceable in courts. Maybe they're going to lose their house. You really have to get serious with this. I mean, this is the future of this republic, depends upon election integrity, and to change that means that we have to elect people at the, you know, grassroots level in the state legislatures, and there's got to be something behind that. It can't just be more empty promises. Look what happened with Kelly Loeffler.
That is so powerful and exciting of an idea. One of our guests that we're actually going to have back as a regular is from Zimbabwe, and he was saying, make no deals with any politician unless they will guarantee freedom of speech. And I think that that should be definitely one of those things that they should be held accountable over, because without freedom of speech, like, it doesn't even matter what else you agree to, because like things like what are happening with the media, it just tends to turn the tide when you have them like on lockdown with the government. Like that Section 230 thing seriously needs to happen. Stephanie, I know you might have gotten cut off. I don't know if you had wanted to ask something. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of cursed me earlier when you applauded my new iPad, and for some reason it just, the internet just went out. So I'm talking on my phone now. But I'm very curious as to how does a kid from LA wind up in Eastern Europe? I'm like, that's pretty adventurous, pretty bold. I moved to Phoenix a few years ago, and I felt like I was in another country just being in Phoenix. I can only imagine what it's like to be in Eastern Europe, but you know, a lot of wonderful things. So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, basically, I worked on for SEIU, and it was after the election year 2008. I probably raised $300,000 or $400,000 for Obama from our members who are working people that, you know, each gave, you know, $10, $20, $30, $40 contributions on a monthly basis for 6 months leading up to the election. and there was big promises. And then once Obama was in, he kept none of those promises. He launched a series of wars abroad against innocent people. He was involved in helping to create ISIS with John McCain. Just horrible war crimes, crimes against humanity. And I realized that the things I had learned as a youth in terms of my study in school of geopolitics, that actually what needed to happen is we had to cut the tentacles off of the deep state, cut the tentacles off. And I knew that George Soros was a big player in a lot of the problems in the United States. And he was, wherever Obama's policy went, wherever you had, let's say, Victoria Nuland, right, who's married to neocon Kagan, wherever you had these people, the usual suspects, you had Soros working to build these fake protest movements to topple governments, right? So where I'm located was previously a victim, I guess you could call it, of precisely one of these George Soros sort of operations from decades past. And I'm well situated here. Primarily, my fight has been against Soros, and this is, I decided to be forward deployed and to take the fight to them.
Very cool. And awesome. Last question I kind of want to go in with is from Jess, and she's asking, sort of trying to get her head around your rubric for how you estimate things, but she was wondering, do you have a team, or are you doing this all yourself? It's quite remarkable, the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I have a non-governmental organization here in Belgrade called the Center for Syncretic Studies. And in the past, we've been pretty well staffed up, but in recent years, with a lot of slanderous attacks, a lot of the left-wing publications attacked us very heavily. And we had staff, we had interns, we had a newspaper. We still have a newspaper called Fort Russ News. But we've been under a severe attack. So I would say that we are down to about a 3-man job right now. And but in the past, we had as many as 8 people. And but building this model, the thing is that the model I have built for the past 5 years. So I don't have to rebuild the model every time. I just have to try to plug in the variables. And it takes maybe 30 or 40 hours of work to figure out what the variables will be. But what the factors are is pretty unchanged. That's what makes it a reliable enough model to call it a model. Basically, how you figure out what things are worth is you plug them into the back historical experiences. You test them against past events. So then that's how you fine tune it. So that's how you adjust it. But in terms of new things like new media, it's unfortunate. I don't want to sound cynical or nihilistic or anything, but I mean, in this field, like what just happened in the United States is just data in terms of what's the role now of social media influencing outcomes of these types of scenarios in first world countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And we hear a lot about, like, if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. How do you learn from history? I think that you have provided a wonderful tool on being able to do it. And I was just thinking back, I'm doing my Jen, what is her name? Psychic or whatever. I'm circling back.
Circle back.
I'm gonna circle back because I did think about something you had said in one of your groups, that it's important for you not to take in too much other information to influence what you look at. So I figure that you probably haven't, when I was talking about some of the biblical prophecies and things, the current prophetic movement and what they're saying about the election, you probably haven't taken too much of that in.
Aware of it. I'm aware of it, but in terms of comparing events to prophecy, I don't, because I'm trying to keep my model as you inferred, because it can sway you. It can actually affect how you want to evaluate these things. And I try to avoid that just for the utility of the model.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I want to let you know that I have the honor and privilege of doing another 30 minutes or so with Joaquin on my Simply Felicity show. And so if you're catching me on YouTube, you'll need to switch to my other YouTube channel. If you're on Facebook, you can just find me on Felicity Joy, because I'll be sharing it right there. And in closing, I do want to share Jess Olivito's comment about that this man is a genius and a gift from God. I could not have said it better. It's really true. And I just thank God for your servant's heart, to come on a show like mine, and to share and to do what you do. So please, everyone, make sure I have pinned it to the Facebook comments. I believe that worked on YouTube as well. I have Joaquin's Instagram channel. You can find him on Telegram at New Resistance is the name of that group. And on either of those places, you can find listed his PayPal and perhaps his Patreon. I have his Patreon if you need it. I guess you could message me for that, but please consider supporting his work. You've heard about the sort of trials that his group has had based on the media and coming after him. I mean, he actually had to go dark for a while because he was implicated in the Michael Flynn case. But after Michael Flynn was exonerated, he was able to come back to us on social media. So justice is incredibly important, because without that, we would not have had his voice. And I just couldn't be more grateful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. To be with you. God bless.
Thank you.
Bless you as well. Well, thanks, guys. We will actually be back tonight at 7:30 p.m. Central for Black Conservative Female. And we just thank you so much. God bless you all.